Last winter, I taught a class called Curriculum and Materials Development for Kuyper students in the TESOL program at Roosevelt Park Community Ministries. And today I want to talk to you about the planning, the implementation, and the results of that experience. My overall goal in this endeavor was to use service learning in such a way that students would be motivated to work in the community for the benefit of others while at the same time developing their teaching skills. I wanted students to build healthy, reciprocal relationships with the English language learners, and I hoped that the effort would also enhance the ministries of Roosevelt Park Ministries. So before I begin, here's an outline of what I want to do in this session. First, there's a short overview of the current TESOL program at Kuyper, then a discussion of the reasons for changing the structure of one of these courses, Curriculum and Materials Development, and then the research that's available on service learning, course design, and syllabus design, as well as some conclusions about the result of this experience. So, first, the TESOL certificate program at Kuyper includes the following courses. It is a 16-credit minor. For most of our students, it is a very doable, focused addition to their major. The first two courses on this list are the theory courses, grammar and second language acquisition. And then the second two, methods of teaching English as a second language and curriculum and materials development, are the more practical how-to courses, which are then a combination of theory and practice. Finally, the students do a supervised teaching practicum. Today's focus then is on the fourth course in this series. So what was the impetus for the change of this within this course? The primary reason for changing the course was student feedback. I found that after 4 TESOL courses and doing some tutoring, my students still sometimes were very, very nervous about actually teaching in a classroom and being responsible for organizing a class. Some of this is fairly normal, right? But I sensed a lot of insecurity, and I decided that my students simply needed more practice in a safe, supervised setting with real ESL students before they did their teaching practicum. The students needed to see ESL teaching model. And frankly, this is impossible to do in an artificial classroom setting, such as we have at Kuyper, with fellow students pretending to be English language learners. It just didn't work very well. So that was the first impetus. The second was a change mandated by the major curriculum revision at Kuyper College. Every program needed to incorporate at least one course that did service learning, and in the TESOL program, that meant that one of the 4 courses had to become a service learning course as well. So, a third reason for change was the persistent requests for student help from community leaders and community-based, church-based ESL programs. There just is a lot of need for ESL teachers. And so at the beginning of every semester, I received numerous requests from programs asking for teachers or tutors to help. So I thought if we moved the class off campus, my students and I could form a team and provide a class for a group of students. So again, I decided that the course I would redesign would be the curriculum and materials development. students in this course already have some knowledge about lesson planning, goal setting, games to play, activities. They learned that in the methods course. So what students usually do in this course is work together to build a series of lessons and units on a theme. And then together they organize this into a curriculum book that we produce. And in the past we have done that for a church camp in Kosovo, I believe several different community-based ESL programs in Grand Rapids, and then we give that curriculum to the program, that particular program. This time I had a grant for us to produce the curriculum and give it to 40 ESL programs around in Michigan, especially in Grand Rapids area. So this seemed like a perfect opportunity to combine all of these assets and do that for Roosevelt Park Ministries. So again, what do pre-service teachers look like or feel like? My first concern is to provide a good learning experience for my students. And the students need to see ESL teaching modeled in a real-life classroom with English language learners who are real and ask real questions. My students doubt their own abilities. They need further practice. They often don't have a realistic perception of what ESL is like. And so I thought that providing them with a supervised experience with real ESL students would give them the kind of support, and I could model some good teaching and we could practice together. Students found it to be hard work, to take forever, and particularly was rewarding when the English language learner finally understood. Perhaps one of the key aha moments for students was realizing that even with all their inadequacies, they could actually teach someone English. So, I also spent a lot of time researching service learning and what a course that includes service learning would look like. Barbara Jacoby is the faculty advocate for service learning at the University of Maryland, and she has written extensively in this area. She defines service learning as a form of experiential education in which students engage in activities that address human and community needs, together with structured opportunities intentionally designed to promote student learning. In other words, service learning is different than just volunteering or even community service. It's based on the idea that learning doesn't necessarily occur as a result of the experience itself, but rather as a result of the critical reflection on the experience. So, I needed to be sure that I incorporated critical reflection in the requirements. Other key concepts include service learning, or include a balance between service learning and academic content. Academic content needs to be applied to the service content, and making the two dovetail is very, very important. In fact, Jacoby suggests that service learning should be viewed as just like another textbook. Another distinctive of service learning is the idea that the community agency is involved in the planning process. The principle of reciprocity refers to how we relate to the community as partners not as receivers of our benevolence, but there has to be some give and take back and forth. All the players need to expect to learn. The emphasis has to be on doing with, not doing for. So, according to Barbara Jacoby, by doing service learning, college students will see how the course is relevant to the issues that they're faced in real life as well. They will have the opportunity to act on real problems and engage with individuals. I found this to be true. The Kuyper students began to see the realities around immigration law, isolation, subcultures. Several of them told me, I knew issues existed around immigration, but I really didn't know anyone affected by it. Students began to see the value of involvement in their communities. The last distinctive of service learning is that it has to be reflective, and I've already talked about that. So, I needed a partner, and Roosevelt Park Ministries was a good choice for us to partner with because they offer a variety of services to the surrounding community, which is 70% Hispanic. One of their needs, which is sometimes difficult for them to fill, is finding enough ESL teachers and tutors for their ESL classes. And generally, if they don't have a teacher, they can't offer the class. So sometimes there's only one class, depending on the number of teachers they have. So offering an ESL class for them, as the students and myself as the teacher, was mutually beneficial. We enrolled 30 students initially, and we maintained between 15 and 20, closer probably to 15, but we also had a lot of coming and going. We had probably between 8 and 10 consistent students every week. So what goes into designing a course like this? Well, Jacoby suggests that you make sure that there's a very strong balance between service and academic content. But once you've figured that out, then you need to know how you're going to go about actually teaching in this context. Once that's decided, then you need the readings, the materials that you will use, the other academic content, how you'll include the assignments, the critical reflections, and other assessment tools that are so vital to service learning. And my question was, how would I model teaching about curriculum design within this context? So the first thing that needs to be done when you're designing any course is you have to look at the outcomes and what you need. You want your students to know at the end of the course. That's always how you begin. You start with the end in mind. That's called backwards design, by the way, and it's a curriculum design process. What will students be able to do at the end of the course? At the end of the course, my students would be able to do the following, and I will let you read this. One of the biggest pieces was that students would be able to apply what they had learned in the academic piece of the class to the actual curriculum design process and come up with 3 lessons which formed a unit. Each student had to write their own unit, and that unit had to fit under a consistent theme. And so in a few weeks we are publishing that document, and you'll be able to see it. I wanted to have it for today, but it's not ready. But anyway, so think about, once you have the outcomes of the class ready, think about the organization of the class. It's a 3-hour class in the evening. It has to work within the time frame allotted. I have to teach curriculum design to students who have never heard of it. That's an hour and a half of it, right? Then I had to teach with my students to a group of students. When we started, we said it was beginning level, but when some English language learner talks about how much English they know, they're all beginners. And so we had 30 people enrolled who were all at different levels of beginning, right? So how do you organize this? Well, that's part of the syllabus. And so I needed to make sure that students learned what service learning was really about and how it fit into the course. What was it going to look like in the context of Roosevelt Park Ministries? What were the students' roles and responsibilities? For example, the first day of class in January, we met for 3 hours at Roosevelt Park, and I introduced the idea of critical journaling and curriculum design, what that was and what the assignments were, the syllabus, everything, and the context. Then we designed together a way, very quick and dirty, of trying to figure out what level our students were truly on, a placement test. Okay? From there, I divided we made a list of everything students would have to know in a beginning level class. Okay? And I had come prepared with some ideas, obviously. And we divided those between the weeks of class that we had. And then each student was assigned to teach one part of the lesson, and we divide the lesson into 3 parts. First part would be review kinds of things from the week before, an introductory activity, kind of setting the stage for what we were going to do. Then we would have the lesson, and then we would have a review and an activity to practice the lesson. Each student in the class had to take a turn teaching one of those pieces. And so some weeks you were off the hook, other weeks you had to present something. All of those pieces had to be in my office by Monday morning. We taught on Tuesday night, so that I could review it, make sure that it was pretty much on level. Because as the students said, we're not sure. And I thought that's the least I can do, is to make sure that my students feel comfortable with what they're teaching, to give some ideas. And that was some individual back and forth. It was a lot of work in that sense, but the end result was we had good lessons going into it. Okay? And I think that's really the key to, and I'll talk later on about some of the things we can improve. But so what are the results of this? Well, the effective service learning and doing all of this curriculum work, according to either Giles, Stenson, and Gray, in a publication called At a Glance, What We Know About the Effects of Service Learning on College Students, they divide it into 4 main areas. 1, personal, 2, social, 3, institutional, and 4, community. Actually, it's not social, it's academic. So, on the personal outcomes for students, Kuyper students in their journals said things like, I can totally see myself doing this. I think I found a career. Or, a lot of students just said, I can do this. I discovered I can do this. And that in itself met one of my goals, to have students feel like teachers. So academic outcomes, we found that positive impact on their academic learning. Students told me that they understand the whole process of lesson planning and curriculum design more thoroughly because they had to apply it to a specific situation, and they would think of something and say, I don't think that would work. Our students don't know this, so we wouldn't be able to do that. And I think that was very, very important. I noticed that the questions about curriculum design changed. They always had trouble imagining what an ESL student would ask or would be able to do. That no longer was the case. They knew. Institutionally, students reported stronger, according to Eisler and her partners, students report stronger faculty relationships than those who are not involved in service learning. I think this is very true. While strong mentorship normally goes on between our faculty and students due to the small size of our college, it's very true that these students bonded and formed a teaching team with me. They had taken ownership of the class so that even when I was out of town one week at a conference, they happily told me, don't worry, we'll take care of it. Hand over the keys. And since I had the keys to Roosevelt Park so we could lock up at the end, they just said, make sure you give us the keys so we can lock up. And it really was a turning point in how the students engaged, not only with me, but also with the ESL team there. So students also report in their journals that they were much more aware of the needs of the community and the ESL students. Students would be concerned about people who would walk from their home to the building in the very, very, very bad snowstorm we had one evening when we still had class because it happened during class time, and we were amazed that students showed up. But then students said, okay, in the dark, walking home by themselves, that's really not safe, is it? In this community, we should give them a ride home. And that's what happened. Partner benefits. How did our partner benefit Roosevelt community? We provided ESL classes for the community that semester. We enrolled 30 students and maintained an average of 10 to 15 students during the semester. And one of our students became a volunteer for them this summer and volunteered for them the whole summer in their program, allowing them to have an ESL class this summer too. Conclusions. College students enthusiastically report understanding concepts and improvement of teaching and planning ability. I see that this semester in the grammar class, a theory class. I have a student who says, you totally need to know this, folks, because if you don't, somebody will ask you. And it's true. I could say that and students wouldn't believe me, but when one of my students says it, because based on experience, it is very, very valuable. Another result was that we had a core group of ESL, English language learners, who remained thoroughly committed all semester and who did a very, very wonderful job bonding with our students. At the end, they were very sad that we were finished, and yet they understood that. And one of the other things that we tested was, how how good was our teaching? And, so we gave little quizzes. And so at every week we would ask about the week before, and 80%, approximately 80% of the answers, and oftentimes more, were correct. And that was sort of our goal. If they could remember 80% of what we had taught, that was the goal. Growth areas. There always are a few, aren't there? So, overwhelmed by the need to write lesson plans, students thought that journaling was so important, and I needed to emphasize that more. And that was just something that kind of somehow students didn't think it was that as important as making a good lesson plan. The class is advertised in the community as beginning level. However, we allowed students who enrolled in the beginning level class to stay even if they were not really beginners. And that, however, is detrimental to those who are true beginners, because those people felt very vulnerable. And what happened was, because a lot of we're not experienced teachers, right? A lot of my students weren't. And so students would ask questions that would be higher level, and eventually the class became not a beginning class, but probably at least a high beginning class, if not more intermediate. And simply because of the kinds of students who kept coming back and asking questions. And so because it was not geared, we didn't stay firm in our gearing of the class to low beginners, we lost a lot of those students, I felt. The other big piece about working with a partner that we should have done better was that we needed to talk to the ESL students in our community, in the class, about what we were doing and why. I thought, and I assumed, that they would understand that this was a class that was being taught and our students were teaching them what they were learning. However, I think there was some confusion, because afterwards, when we did an evaluation, they said having a different teacher for each section was confusing. We like to have the same teacher all the time. And so that is something that we need to address if we do this again. And I would say that would be the key growth area that we would need to address. So, overall, despite some major, or minor glitches, actually, not major glitches, this class was a resounding success for the Kuyper students involved, for me as their professor, and for the Roosevelt Park community. We're grateful that they agreed to host us, and we look forward to a continuing relationship with them in the future. Thank you.
Any questions?
No questions? Great.
How does the faith element that most of the students from Kuyper will have, how does that kind of play into how they, you talked a little bit about how they respond within the community, get to see another culture within their culture. How does the faith component play a part into the kind of teaching and students doing?
Because Roosevelt Park Ministries is not a church-based ministry, but a community-based ministry, we did not, it's not overtly Christian, although it is,
Yeah.
founders are Christians.
Yeah.
And so we did not open with prayer or anything like that. However, we did explain that we were from Kuyper College and that it was a religious college, and that students received However, in our relationships with people, students often talked about, well, I go to church here, I do this in my church. And so we did know where people were going to church. That was part of the discussion, you know, where do you go to church? Or do you do this in your church? And so, in fact, at one point, there was somebody who said to one of our students, I'd like to go to that new church plant you're working with. And so we started those relationships. Those are generally relationship kinds of things. And so we did not hide that we were Christians. So, but it wasn't an integral. It was an integral part of what we did, and the reasons behind it, but not